This episode of Food for Thought is brought to you by the listeners of this podcast. You can join others who are making this podcast possible by going to joyfulvegan.com/donate or just patreon.com/Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. Thank you so much in advance. Today's episode is Help or Hinder, Understanding When Baby Fawns Need Human Intervention. Welcome to Food for Thought. My name is Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. I'm your host. My work is dedicated to empowering people to live meaningfully, compassionately, and healthfully with abundance and joy. I've been doing this for 23 years, and you can find lots of resources in my books, in this podcast, which is in its 17th year, in the offshoot podcast called Animology, through my daily social media posts, and through my Joyful Vegan trips, which are curated, all-inclusive vegan trips around the world. You can learn more about who I am and what I do by visiting my website, joyfulvegan.com. Hi, everybody. I hope you're doing fabulously well. It's spring, and this is a really, really important topic. There is a reason I'm timing it now, and it is because it is baby season, and I get questions about this all the time, and every single wildlife rescue group around the world gets this question about what to do when you see a baby fawn all by herself. And we're going to talk about that. Before we do, the most exciting news, if you think this is exciting, I do, is that our Alsace 2023 trip is now confirmed, as is our French countryside trip. And of course, we're leaving soon in June for our Tuscany and Northern Italy trips. So all of the trips that we have planned for 2023 are a go. And there is space in Alsace, and there's space in French countryside. And I think there's one more room in Tuscany still. I don't know why Tuscany has not filled completely, because it's kind of amazing. So go to joyfulvegantrips.com, check out the trips and the details and the itineraries, and just book your spot. They're wonderful trips. They're wonderful ways to connect with like-minded people, to connect with me. I do lots of cooking demos and have lots of very personal interaction with you, and we just pick the most incredible places. So I hope you can join me for that. Spring has sprung, and unfortunately I haven't been able to enjoy the weather as much as I was hoping to, because on Easter Saturday I was hosting lunch for friends that of course went on for hours into the evening, and just as we were wrapping up, I stepped down off a step and I broke my ankle. I didn't know it was broken at the time. It was very painful and very badly swollen, and I was in a lot of pain. And we waited a few days for me to get the x-ray, only because I do live 100 steps up from the street, and I was just really reluctant to go down the steps in so much pain and feeling so vulnerable. So we did go eventually to get the x-ray, and indeed it is fractured. Thank goodness I don't need any surgery, but I cannot put any weight on my ankle for 4 to 6 weeks. And I cannot, they said the whole healing process will take about 2 to 3 months. Could be longer, could be less, really depends on how well I heal. But we are still going to Italy. We're definitely still going to Tuscany. It will be 2 weeks from the day I broke it. It'll be 2 months, 8 weeks from the day I broke it to the day we leave for Tuscany. And we will be hosting that trip still. I'll be able to be walking, I'm sure, by then, just probably gently and carefully. And then our Northern Italy trip is after that. And very sadly, I won't be able to hike while we're there, but I will be there 100% and still really, really looking forward to these trips. We need them very badly. It's been a little rough here at the Patrick-Goudreau household. There's a lot going on, but this is our time to just shore up and reach out to all of our friends and really pull all the levers we have and use all the tools and resources that we have accumulated over the decades in terms of just self-care and caring for each other and managing some mental health challenges and the physical pain and the physical challenges of not being able to get around. So it's been a little rough, but these are the times where we really see what we have in our lives. And of course, I'm so grateful for so many things. It could have been worse, could have needed surgery, could have been both ankles, so many things. And it's been wonderful. I have talked about the Buy Nothing Project before, and just even if you don't have a Buy Nothing Project or are a part of one, just our neighbors I've reached out to. So I have the crutches from a couple on our street who have given me their crutches in the past when I tore my meniscus. And my very good friend who lives on the street as well, she gave me her wheelchair. And then I reached out on Buy Nothing and just kind of thought, I'm just going to ask for a scooter. I don't know if anybody has it, because I feel like every day I see someone putting out on the Buy Nothing group that they need a scooter for, torn this or broken that or fractured that. And so the response has been incredible. Right away, a woman named Elizabeth reached out and said, I have a scooter for you. So we went and picked that up. And then her advice, because she had torn her ankle pretty badly and needed pins and surgery, she had lots of good advice for me, and I appreciated it so much. And one of the pieces of advice was having a scooter on every floor. And when she first said that to me, I was like, I don't need that. Yes, I do. Because the crutches are just so difficult to get around. They get painful after a while under your arms, and it's just hard, and it's a little scarier to get around on crutches. So I was about to decline someone else offering me another scooter because I thought, well, no, I've got one from Elizabeth, but someone else, her name is Felicia, she reached out and she said, I've got one. And I thought, I think it's a really good idea that I have a scooter on every floor. And so we didn't pick it up. She dropped off the scooter. Like, I'm so moved by her kindness. These are complete strangers. And when we were texting, just kind of organizing and coordinating her coming to drop it off because David had to go and bring it up, she said, I have a surprise for you. This is a complete stranger. And the surprise was she actually brought two scooters, and they're both all-terrain scooters. So one of them is in the garage, and I think it has to be put together. David has to put it together, and I don't, it's not urgent right now, but for when I'm able to start getting out more and being confident, I can actually go outside and, eventually be able to kind of scoot around outside because it's all-terrain. I would do this carefully with supervision, but I just don't feel confident to do that right now. Just too soon, and I have to get down all those stairs in order to do that. But she dropped off two, which was so kind. And now I have a system. So I'm getting around better in the house, and I have an incredible support system in my friends and David and my scooters and my wheelchair and my crutches. So I've got a system in all these ways, and I'm doing everything I can to just keep taking care of myself. I'm eating incredibly, nutrient densely. I don't know if that's a word. I'm eating even more nutrient dense food than I normally do, which seems like you wouldn't think I'd be able to because I eat pretty well. But I'm going to be sharing those things with you as well, just in terms of just really focusing on bone healing foods and what I'm doing in all the ways. I'm still working out on my upper body. So whatever I can do to just stay strong and be positive is what I'm doing. And my work is part of that. And so I wanted to share this episode with you because in the middle of all of this, some neighbors reached out to me. This would have been on, I think, Saturday. And what's really lovely is this is a neighbor I don't really have a lot of contact with. I wouldn't say we're friends. I say hi to her. I see her, when we've had neighborhood events. This is all pre-COVID. And so I knew her, but I don't have a relationship with her, but because I have really put myself out there on our neighborhood listserv and people just know me as the deer person, or I think they know me as the animal person in general, but we do live in a neighborhood that has a lot of deer. And I have been very forthright and very, very vocal about, what we need to do to take care of the deer and, just excited whenever there's new babies. And so I would share that on the listserv. I am kind of known as the deer person, and not even just in our neighborhood, but among our friends. And I'll tell you some stories because I have gotten many calls from people saying, what do I do? And this is just, I'm saying this to you because as you become, this, if you're whatever you are expert in, or just that you're vegan, that people will come to you to ask you questions about being vegan, or if you are a dog person or a cat person, right? So people have come to me, and I'm so grateful for that. And the only reason they have is because I've put it out there that I am very happy to share what I know that I've learned over the years about the best things we can do for animals in general. And so I got a text from her. Her name's Danielle, and she just said, I'm kind of dealing with a lot of stress here at home, and I get this text. And of course, I immediately want to just help and solve it. And of course, I can't because I can't do anything or go anywhere. But her text just said, there's a problem with the deer. Can you help? Really frantic. And I saw it and I go, oh my God. Just kind of my stomach just kind of tightened up right away. And I thought, first thing I thought was, well, of course, yes. The second thing I thought was, I bet she sees an abandoned fawn. Because I think she said fawn. I think she said baby deer. And the first thing I thought was, I bet she sees an abandoned fawn and thinks there's something wrong and needs to know what to do. And so I immediately said yes, and absolutely tell me what's going on. And she said, "Can I call you?" So she called me, and indeed, she and another neighbor, her name is Marie, I think. And again, I don't have a relationship with Marie or Maria. I think it's Marie. And so she said, "I'm here with Marie. We're walking in a neighborhood near ours, on a street near ours." And she said, "There's a baby fawn right up against a garage at the end of a driveway, and she's all alone and she doesn't look well, and we don't know what to do." And Danielle kind of communicated to her friend, like, "I know what to do. We'll call Colleen. She knows what to do." And I was just so grateful that she thought to call me. And, as I'm going to talk about in this episode, whatever you can do to know a resource to reach out to, whether it is a friend who knows more than you do about a particular situation, or if you have a wildlife support organization, a wildlife rehab, a wildlife rescue, or your city might have an animal control, and I'm calling it animal control because that's what most cities call their animal control, animal services, what have you. If you have an animal services, obviously as part of your government in your city, have those numbers in your phone so that when there is a moment where there is an animal in distress, you know who to call right away. And you might not get, you might not be able to fix it, but at least next step is, who do I call to just tell me what to do, right? The reason I'm doing this is so that you have some data and you have some information in the back of your mind, so that if you encounter a situation like this one in particular, which many people do in the springtime, you'll at least know what to do. I still encourage you to have wildlife rescue in your phone. So I said, listen, I am 99% certain that she's okay. I can't guarantee it, but I'm sure she's okay. First of all, thank you so much for your compassion. I'm sure she's okay. And mom's nearby, no doubt. So are you able to see if mom's nearby? But don't worry, let's just gather more information. And as I was talking to her, the woman whose house they were at, whose driveway it was, whose garage it was, pulled up. And it was just so perfect. The timing couldn't have been perfect because Danielle and Marie went over to her and said, don't pull in the driveway. Don't pull in the driveway. Can you park on the street? There's a baby deer there. She's going to freak out, right? It was just so compassionate. It was just so sweet. So the woman, they were laughing because it sounded like she had some trouble kind of pulling around and parking on, outside her house. So she did. And they went to go talk to her to tell her what was going on. And they said, "I'll call you back." So they called me back and they said, of course, poor timing, that woman whose house it was having like a massive party that night. And what was she going to do? So let's unpack what the situation is, and I'll tell you what I told them, and I'll tell you what the outcome was. But this is something so many people encounter. And if you don't have deer where you live, I hope you still listen to this, because you will have information that someone else who may need when they encounter this particular situation. So here is the deal with baby fawns and their moms, and why deer napping, fawn napping, is so common in the springtime. So with the best of intentions, people see a baby fawn, and sometimes, because this particular fawn was the size of a cat, like really small, right? Really vulnerable, curled up. They look really scared. They look really alone, and they want to help. And what so often happens is they kidnap this fawn and they bring them to to their nearest wildlife rescue, which is so well-intentioned and so compassionate and so beautiful. And it's the worst thing we can do. And I'm going to tell you how this can play out differently if you encounter this situation. So number one, The way it works, the way the deer system works is mom needs to leave the fawn in a safe location so that she can go and forage for food so that she can then come back and have all the milk she needs to feed her baby. And so she will find a safe place. She'll do the best she can, right? And sometimes the fawn will wander off a little bit. And so I don't know if I doubt she left the fawn right in front of the garage. I saw in the picture they sent me, there was a lot of ivy all around. She could have very well left the fawn in the ivy and the fawn wandered over to the garage. It's very possible. So mom will leave the baby in a safe location, usually in some kind of tall grass, usually in some kind of thicket, usually in that ivy, that kind of thing, because she knows they'll be safe there. And the deer, the fawn, is programmed to not leave the spot, to not move. It's like mom said, you stay here. I will be back. Do not move. And the baby knows not to move. Again, they might wander off like a little bit, but they don't leave. And they stay still and they stay quiet. And it's one of the reasons they have spots. It's a natural camouflage because it helps them blend in with their surroundings and avoid predators. The spots serve as a form of like color, like disruptive coloration. Like it makes it harder for predators to see the fawn as a distinct shape in the dappled light of the forest floor. Like that's the ideal situation, right? They would be in the forest, and imagine the light dappling through the leaves and the trees. That's why they have those light colored spots when they're just babies, when they're just born. And, that's ideal. I realize that, we're all, or I shouldn't say we're all, many of us live in urban situations. There are deer in urban situations as well. And of course you might see them not in a dappled forest situation, but that's the reason they have spots. Now, depending on if it's a black-tailed deer or mule deer, the duration of the spots on a fawn varies. But for the most part, fawns will start losing their spots at around 3 to 4 months, 4 months, 5 months. By 6 months, they will have shed their spots completely, and their coats will just become that lovely brown fawn color. That is how we get the color fawn from baby fawns, or gray, depending on the species, depending on the type of deer. And so that's just something to know. If you see a fawn, if you see a deer who has spots still, they are between 0 and 5-6 months old. Now, the reason it's important to know that is because that's about the time period, that's about the time frame where it's possible to help a fawn in need. After that, it's really impossible. And I'm saying this because of my own personal experience that I've had with many, many situations with deer who needed support here on our property or just neighboring properties. So the way wildlife rehabbers are able to determine whether it's safe or possible to rescue a baby deer is based on their spots. And once their spots are gone, it's just too risky. You could consider them young adults. I mean, they're not full-grown adults yet, but they're still, they're going into adulthood, and it becomes riskier and riskier for you to try and capture them if you see that they're in distress. They're prey animals. They're very susceptible to stress-related conditions. There's something called capture myopathy, which can be fatal. So capture myopathy is a condition that can occur when an animal is subjected to extreme physical stress or extreme emotional stress, and it can cause muscle damage, heart failure, and other health issues. So, I know this because I've, shared a lot of my experiences with deer and the situations we've been in with them on social media, and there's an instinct for us to want to just help, right? To just want to go rescue them, go help them. But with wild animals, it's very different than if it were a domesticated animal. There's a huge difference. And so capture myopathy is one of the risks that you're taking, inflicting upon a wild animal or a deer in this case, because it really, if you tried to chase them or tranquilize them or capture them, it could cause more problems than if you didn't do anything at all. So, you've heard me talk about different rescue situations in this podcast. I'm talking specifically about deer in this case, and full-grown deer. And, for me, it's really difficult too, because one of the things I value so much about living in the house we do is that I get to see all this beautiful urban wildlife. I mean, every day, my favorite thing to do is look on our Ring cameras and see the opossum, the skunks, the raccoons, the deer, the rats. I see them also in the ivy and on the ground looking for water, squirrels, birds, and the deer. And I'm so grateful for seeing all these animals. We've seen foxes. We haven't seen them in a while, but foxes have been in this neighborhood as well. And it brings me so much joy. But on the flip side, it also brings me so much despair and sadness and pain when I see them suffering. And my narrative in the past has been, it's so frustrating not to be able to help. And what I realized is, no, there's just different ways to help. Helping doesn't only and always mean direct rescue, right? And this is something I've learned over the years. It doesn't mean I'm still not in pain when I see them suffering. And I'm going to tell you some scenarios where I've been able to intervene. But it just means that there's more than one way to care, and there's more than one way to help, right? We're not powerless. There's always something we can do. The first thing we can do is just pay attention. I'm always paying attention to kind of the outside and how the animals are looking. And so paying attention is just such a gift that we can give to everyone around us, the animals around us, right? So second is that I care. And that's the other thing we can do, just by caring. And that's what was so beautiful about my neighbors contacting me. They cared, they care, people care. And then the third is just realizing, okay, what can I do if it's not direct rescue? If I can't just, go and grab this deer, and save him and, bring him to a hospital and give him surgery. If I can't do that, what else can I do? And so just even paying attention is helpful. I also, try to create a very quiet environment around our house. We're able to do that right now. There's been some changes that have been a bit stressful, and I've had to cope with them. The neighbor whose house we used to just have complete open area right from outside of our yard. That person was there for many years, died, and the person who moved in has slowly taken over that space and fenced it in. And so the deer have other ways to migrate, but that one got closed off. And now they have dogs, and there's been some changes, but change is the only constant, and that's okay. We're coping, and it's fine, and the deer are fine, and the animals figure out their way, and that's what they do. They're resourceful and resilient. So the point is, in my space where I can create quiet, I do. And so that's what we do. And we have water out for them. And as I said, we create this quiet space. And I'm also very mindful. You would have heard me talk about this, I think, maybe even in the last episode, about communicating with folks. We make sure that the animals have migration paths. And, every animal is different, right? The deer need a large space to be able to walk through and migrate through. They can't jump. I mean, they can sometimes jump over fences, but it depends. Can they jump back over again? Really depends on what the slope of the ground is, right? So deer need one kind of opening. Raccoons can climb. Okay, they're probably pretty good. Possums are small enough. Skunks are small enough to squeeze through a space. Skunks can dig, so can a possum. So they can dig a little, tunnel underneath, right? So I'm mindful of that in our space. I just do the best I can to make sure it's a safe place. And I've communicated this to neighbors and friends. Maybe some people think I'm bossy. Maybe some people think it's not my business, but I do the best I can to just help people understand what we can do for animals. And, as we've talked about, we can do things like change legislation to increase migration paths for wildlife. So there are ways to help. Now, there are different situations, and I'm going to give you a trigger warning. I don't think I've ever given a trigger warning on this podcast, but I'm only saying this because I'll tell you a story about a young fawn who I was able to help, but it was very difficult to watch this poor little guy. And it was difficult. So mamas have their babies, and it's more common for does to have two fawns at the same time rather than one, because the mortality rate in deer is so high that nature has enabled at least one deer to survive because often one dies from something. And, I've seen now in the 10 years we've been here, I've seen many, many births and many, many twins born. Sometimes I see one baby born. Most of the time it's two. And I've seen in many of these cases them grow to adulthood. And I've seen in some cases them lose one, sometimes both. And so this was several years ago. I named the deer so I can kind of keep an eye and track them. I just like doing it. So I named him Pius, like from Antoninus Pius, a Roman figure. And he showed up one day with his sibling. He was still mostly spotted, but starting to lose his spots, and mom. And he showed up with a very, very badly broken leg. And so badly broken, it was a compound fracture, and his bone was sticking out of it was his hip bone. And I shouldn't say it was his hip bone. It was his leg bone. It had detached basically from his hip. And so he couldn't, as soon as if he put that foot down, it just, his whole leg just went out from under him. And it was really difficult. So, I just kind of went into high gear, reached out to all of my wildlife people, and I have several, and I sent them videos, and we looked at what was happening, and it was incredibly painful. It was so painful. It was so hard to not just want to, get him. And all the wildlife experts I reached out to agreed that, I deferred to their assessment, which was that he was just about too old to rescue. And so we were just kind of watching him and, looking at it and all of that. And, he continued to come, he was drinking water, he continued to come with his sibling, and he was obviously having trouble keeping up, but he was keeping up. And so I remember we left, this was when we went to Scotland. We did a 100-mile trek in Scotland, and some good friends of ours stayed at the house to watch the cats. And it was the worst. It was just the worst cat sitting experience, because I had to keep texting my friend to say, is he okay? Is his leg still on? Cause we kind of predicted that that his leg would atrophy and he would lose it. And so, one day I wrote to her, hey, is his leg still there? And, the answer was no. He showed up with just 3 legs. Now, the good news about that is that, it was, the blood supply had cut off and obviously atrophied the leg, which meant maybe he wasn't feeling any pain, and or feeling less pain, right? And also that, deer can do well with 3 legs, and as we know with many animals, they can. But as time was going on, it was clear that he was just not gaining weight, not able to really fend for himself, not really keep up. And we just did everything we could to just create support for him. And he, just being with his sibling and his mom was just really lovely to see. So one night we came home, and it was actually the night of a conference, one of my Compassion in Action conferences, and some good friends were with me, and we were climbing the front steps, and we were coming up to the front door, and we were just coming back from the conference, and then we were going to go out to Millennium, because I was taking everybody out to thank them for their support, for being there. Some of them were speaking, so had been speaking. Some of them had just been my support, and so we were going to go to Millennium. So we were coming home for an hour and a half to have a glass of wine, celebrate the conference, the success of the conference, and then go to Millennium. And as we came in the door, my friend Amanda was the last to step in, and she was crying. And I didn't see what she saw, which was Pius was at the front steps, and he was just there. He was dying. And it's Saturday night. And luckily, I've just had a close relationship with anyone who's ever been the director of Oakland Animal Services. And so I was able to reach out to who was the director at the time, Rebecca, and Rebecca was able to reach out to one of her animal control officers and tell him the situation, and said he's going to get back to you as soon as he can. And so we knew at that time there was nothing I could do other than just, I had some friends go off to Millennium first. I needed to kind of regroup and then meet them there. And we did. And then I just waited for the animal control officer's call. And indeed he called, and he went to the house, and we weren't there. And I was able to tell him exactly where the deer was. And indeed he was able to sedate the deer and then bring him to Oakland Animal Services and euthanize him. And it was an incredible gift. And the entire process was so beautiful. He was so compassionate. I was so grateful to be able to do the final act of compassion. And I was so grateful for the compassion of everybody around me. And I was so grateful to Pius, who gave me the opportunity to help him, because he could have gone anywhere and died anywhere where we couldn't have seen him and couldn't have helped him. And I do feel that he knew that he was in a place where he could get support, and we were able to give it to him. So I helped as I could in an indirect way, and then I was able to help as I could in a direct way, and I was really grateful for that. Other instances that have been similar, I couldn't do anything at all. There were in two different cases over the span of several years. One was a Marcus, who was my favorite buck. He was probably about 10 years old, and he was absolutely gorgeous and had the largest, biggest antlers. He was just stunning. And I would see him spar on the hillside I no longer see because our neighbor, put her fence up, but it's her yard. It's fine. I'm just saying, like, I used to be able to see them on that hillside, and I would watch them spar. I would watch him spar with other males. I would watch him spar in the way that he was teaching some of the young males. Like he was like the patriarch, and he was incredibly gorgeous. And one day I was actually on social media. I was filming social media, like, oh, hey, look, there's Marcus coming down. And as he approached, I could see that he was limping. And indeed, his knee was really swollen, but it was intact. It wasn't a compound, at least, thank goodness. This was years before Pius, by the way. And oh God, it was just really hard to watch him struggle, because the reason we have deer and the reason we're in this space with all this wildlife is because we just live on a hill. We all live in this hilly area. We live in a valley. And so there's just hills all on either side of us. And so he must have just tripped. I don't know. I have no idea how he injured himself. And I couldn't do anything. And what was so lovely, again, in the context of people knowing me as the deer person, one day I was coming out of the car, or I was pulling up, and a neighbor was passing by, and I rolled down the window to say hi. I was pulling up to my house, and she said, hey, a neighbor on next door, which I'm not really on next door, a neighbor. So it wasn't like our immediate neighbor. It was like in our vicinity. A neighbor on next door put out a picture of a buck who was in her yard and looking injured, and she was really scared, and she was really frightened and didn't know what to do. And I think it's Marcus. And she did know it was Marcus's name. She did call him by Marcus. And she said, I think it's Marcus. You might want to go look at that post. And so I went upstairs immediately, saw the post, and reached out to this woman and put it on the listserv, put it on the next door post itself, and reached out to her. And I said, that is Marcus. And he looks like he has a broken, ankle, a knee, whatever. He's injured, but he is getting around. And he is more afraid, because she was like, I'm scared of what he's going to do to my baby. My dog can't go outside now. And I'm like, your baby's fine. And the dog is fine. Just, he is more afraid of you, and he just needs support and quiet. And he was foraging, like he was eating. And so I said, like, if you could just make sure, like, it's a quiet space for now, and that he has a place to go to eat, and that, your dog maybe like wait for him to go before you let your dog out. And, if you can provide water, that would be super helpful. So she did. And she was really grateful for someone to be able to say, he's okay. He's not going to hurt you. He's not going to attack you. And just give him quiet and just give him space. And she did. Time went by. I think I saw Marcus a few more times. And I think he may have been around for several more months after that. I just never saw him again. And, that's what happened. But I was again so grateful that I could be a resource. Atticus 2 is a deer who showed up, another buck who showed up. This is now probably just about 2 years ago. And he showed up with a broken back leg. And it was like contorted. And so it was really hard for him to walk, but he got around for like months and months. I saw him for months and months. Again, super painful to see him show up, but I was so glad he showed up, because he would forage around, and then he would drink the water. But I was like, oh my God, like, go somewhere flat. But then, if it's in a flat area, most people have fences up. In the hills, there's just more, kind of open space a little bit. But oh God, it was just so painful to see him show up. And he did. And actually, I will tell you this really funny story. One night, so I could see him on my Ring camera. We have Ring cameras all around our house. And one night I saw him by one of the Ring cameras in the front. And I knew David was coming home. It was like 10 o'clock at night. And I saw Atticus too. I call him Atticus too because Atticus was one of my favorite bucks, and he has also died. I never saw him injured, but I haven't seen him in a couple of years, and he's either moved on or he's moved on in another way. But Atticus 2 is the one I named, the one who had the other break. And so David was coming home, and I saw that Atticus 2 was not leaving that spot, and that he was kind of looking for a place to settle down. And if David came up the stairs, he would have startled Atticus. And I was really afraid because he wouldn't have anywhere to go, like, because this new fence is up, and he just wouldn't have anywhere. He would have felt a bit trapped, and I think he would have been scared, and I didn't want him to hurt himself even more. So my poor husband, my amazing husband, I was like, I'm watching Atticus. I can see it. He's like right there. Oh gosh, he's like going to be right near the steps as you're coming up. And then I saw like David was arriving. He was downstairs, and I called him, and I was like, can you just wait? Like, my poor husband's like waiting to come up our steps because of this injured deer. And in the end, in order to avoid disturbing him, David climbed the hillside as opposed to using our switchbacks and steps to come up to the front door, which, was a bit laborious at 10 o'clock at night in the dark. And it's a steep hill. So I was like, oh my God, you are amazing. And indeed, Atticus stayed where he was, settled down. And so we helped in that way, even though, again, I couldn't just take Atticus 2 and bring him to surgery and get him fixed. So just, whatever we can do to help is what we can do to help. Right. And so just, that's all we can do. And by the way, I wanted to let you know that I often wondered why Pius had broken his leg that way. It snapped his leg, right? Pius was the young one. And I did identify what I thought it was. And I'm still pretty convinced it was, because when I saw the injury, it looked like he had stepped in a trap and then went to go walk and then snapped his bone, right? That's what it looked like. It got snapped in a trap. And I'm like, no one has traps around. I don't care what you say. I am certain no one has traps around. We're in Oakland. People don't have traps around. But something had done that kind of break. And the next year after Pius had died, I saw another set of mom with 2 babies, and they were crossing our tram track because we had a tram track in the front hillside as a way from over the decades. People, this was built like in the, 1970s. Someone put this tram up, whoever owned the house at the time. And we still had it, and we still tried to keep getting it fixed. We used it periodically. It is help for, especially if you have a broken ankle. We don't have it anymore, but it's helpful for groceries. It was helpful, but it kept breaking down, and we just didn't want to keep spending money to keep fixing it. But the track was still there. And the track was it was a track that had like a large section and then like a small, and then like another metal track and then another small section. So large section, track, small section. And I saw one of the baby deer step in and start to wobble and about to trip. And as I saw that, it was like what had happened to Pius flashed in front of my eyes. And I went, that is how he broke his leg. I'm sure of it. Because they had to use that area to cross in order to go through what used to be our neighbor's hillside, but is now fenced in. They're not doing, they don't have to cross as much anymore because there's nowhere to go. But that track was still up. I don't think the fence was up at the time. So the track was still up, and that's what they would cross over that track to migrate in the front. And so I called our contractor and I said, we need to take this track down immediately. No one got hurt. The deer steadied himself and he went on with mom and everything was fine. But I was like, we have babies. I am 100% certain that track needs to come down. I'm 100% certain that's a hazard. And so again, the tram wasn't working well. David to this day still says, where's that tram? Where's that tram? Because, it was definitely helpful, but I removed the track because I saw it as a hazard. Whether or not it was what broke his leg, I don't know. But that's what I did. And so Marcus was a situation where when he first showed up with his broken knee, and it was on social media, like literally as it happened, people would write to me and say, why can't you help him? Why are you letting him suffer? You can tranquilize him. You can help him. He needs help. And, this is partly why I'm doing this episode, is because no, it's not that simple. And, I just named all the ways that we can help in ways that are not direct, but really, it's difficult. It's, this is happening all around us all the time. This is happening out away from us all the time. We just don't see it. When I see it, of course, I want to be able to help, but we can't always do it. And so I mentioned the capture myopathy, which definitely can happen in a young deer, but for a full-grown buck, for us to try and tranquilize him and capture him, it can be done in very rare cases where you have very expert wildlife, experts doing this, but it is not usually a viable option. It depends on the size of the animal, the strength of the animal, the risk of complications or injuries during the capture and the handling process. It's dangerous for them. It's dangerous potentially for the people. You could try to sedate an animal, but you don't know exactly what his weight is, so you can't, determine it like that, accurately. You can give them too little and it won't be sufficient to sedate them, but it'll stress them out. You could give them too much. It could lead to death. They could have capture myopathy. It's just not that simple. And I wish it were. It's just not. And then once you tranquilize them, then there's all the complications. There's respiratory distress. There's hypothermia. There's the capture myopathy again. And also, deer do not do well in captivity. So especially these full-grown bucks or full-grown does even. That's why I'm saying that when we're looking at fawns, we have this very short window where, yes, we can help. And we'll talk about what that looks like. But it's very rare that you'd be able to help a full-grown deer. It just depends on the situation. One final story, just a few months ago, there was another young deer. So he was less than a year. He was less than a year for sure. And this would have been in the fall, I think. And, again, they show up here because the water's here and it gives me the privilege of being able to help them in the ways that I can. This particular deer did not look well. And indeed, he was not moving. He was just still. He looked like he was fading. He looked like he was dying. And I reached out again to animal control, and I'm very lucky to have a relationship with them. And two animal control officers came out right away. I think at first I was going to at one point I had called animal control, said it looks like he died, and and animal control needed to come and pick him up. I will say this also. I know it, letting nature take its course and letting animals who die then be picked at by the next cycle of, carrion birds and, worms and insects. Of course, that's how nature works. And when an animal that size dies right outside your house, the smell is pretty awful. And I've also experienced that. So yes, and it is better for animal control to come out and take the body. And in some cases, they can also, if they have the resources, and it would have to be done probably through the county or state, test for, actually do an autopsy or necropsy to be able to determine the cause of death. There was a time when several deer were dying kind of like one right after the other. I was worried it was a virus, and deer obviously do pass viruses around, and some of the viruses can be very contagious. And I thought it would be helpful to know. And I think I did ask them to do a necropsy. But my point is, that's why I called animal control to take the body. But he hadn't died. I kept seeing his head lift, and I thought, oh God, this is even worse because he needs to be relieved of his suffering. And so I called animal control back, and within less than an hour, they were able to come, and indeed two very kind. In fact, I know this one particular animal control officer very well. He's come several times to pick up either bodies or to euthanize. He's incredibly kind. They came and they did sedate. Usually what they do is they sedate on site, and then they bring them to the facility, and then that's where they euthanize. So they sedated him, and he was out of his suffering. So again, it just really depends on how much the deer let you know that they need you. And in those two cases, Pius and this particular deer, I was able to have them sedated and then euthanized. But that's because they stayed right here, and they were so quiet. Like they they were dying, they couldn't move. But for an adult buck who's like moving around and he's healthy in every other way, but just, challenged by a broken limb, there's just only so much we can do. And so back to our fawns, So what often happens is we see this fawn, we want to be able to help because we have the inclination to do the right thing and to help these animals. And that's a good thing. However, mom says, you stay here. I'm going to go eat so that you can have some milk. And the baby does what she's told and will remain still and hidden until the mother returns. That can take up to 12, sometimes 24 hours. 24 is a little more on the rare side, but it could take up to 12 hours. So even though it looks like she's abandoned, the default response that I would encourage you to have is to leave the baby alone. And this is coming from all of the experts who do this work. They look adorable, they look vulnerable, but they are not in need of assistance unless there are signs present that indicate they are in danger. And so, how do you know what those signs are? So I was talking before about kind of the first thing we can do is just observe, right? Just paying attention is just, trust your own eyes and trust what you know, right? If we know the difference between someone suffering and someone being healthy, right? Now it's a little tricky with the fawns, especially when they're so young, because they're very still and they look like they're really trying to hide more, and they kind of maybe look, meek, and that's true. But let me give you some guidance on what to look for to make sure, or to trust your instincts, right? So, like I said, a healthy fawn's going to be alert. They may be sleeping. They may have their head down on their little legs, on their hooves. They might be sleeping. They might be very still, but she will be alert if her head's up, even if her head's down. I don't want you to feel like her head down means that she's sick. But she's alert. She may stand up. She may even walk around a little bit, but she's not going to run away. It would be very rare. And she's not going to just she can get up, she can stand up, right? She may even cry a little bit with her little high-pitched little baby cry. And that's what you're looking for. Just like, okay, how does she look, right? And if she looks like, if she looks okay, she's just there, mom must have put her down in that spot, mom will be back, I can leave this premises and trust, right? Now, depending on where she is, you could always, if it's someone's house, you can knock on the door, you can ask if they could keep an eye on the baby, right? So just kind of, putting things in place to make sure that 24 hours, she's still there, or 48 hours, she's still there. That's a problem, right? So, pay attention, but leave. And honestly, leaving is going to be the best thing you can do because mom is most likely nearby and watching, and she's not going to come get the baby until you leave. She wants to make sure it's safe. Now, how to tell if there's anything wrong? If the baby's lethargic, very weak looking, disoriented, if they're wet, if they're dirty, if there's diarrhea or even fly larvae, that is something to notice. If they're shivering with what is apparent cold, if they're screaming or crying out for prolonged periods of time. Like I said, if there's just a little squeak, 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 mama, where's my mama, right? That's one way for mama to know to come back. That's okay. But if it's prolonged, if it's from a place of suffering, you should be able to tell the difference. If there's visible injuries, if they're visibly underweight, like really you could see bones, right? Like really underweight. If they approach you, if they come up to you, if they're following people, if they kind of try to nibble them, like they're trying to nibble mom's teats, right? Like if they're doing that, if they're lying prostrate with their legs completely outstretched on either side of them, right? Completely prostrate. And that's a concern. And the other way to know that you may need to intervene is if the mother is nearby and clearly dead. Those are the things to look for. Some wildlife organizations, to just make it easy for the public to remember, have come up with some mnemonics, including the 5 C's. Maybe this will help you. I don't tend to use I don't tend to default to it, but this might be helpful. the 5 C's are: is she crying? Is she cold? Is she coming toward you? Is she covered with blood or insects? Has she been caught by a dog or a cat? Right? So crying, cold, coming, covered, caught. And so maybe that will help you remember. Now, you can still, like, if you're not sure, it's okay. You can call Wildlife Rescue, have that number in your phone. You can call someone who may know better. You can send them a picture. That's what's so helpful these days, of being able to send something from our phone, right? So have the number. There's nothing worse than being in an emergency situation where you're panicking and not knowing who to call. I'm not even thinking how my neighbor even had my number in her phone. Now I'm in her phone and she's in my phone, but we have a neighborhood list, so maybe she had it on her phone. But I'm impressed now that I think about this, because I don't even know how she had my phone in her phone. So have people's numbers in your phone that you can call. And if she's healthy, leave the premises. If she is not, if she has any of these signs, call wildlife services or animal control or whoever you can call. Okay. Now, they will most likely be inundated, especially if it is in the spring, because if you're seeing a fawn, it's the spring. And frankly, domestic animal rescue groups are overwhelmed in the spring too, right? Kittens and puppies and like all that, right? Feral kittens especially. But wildlife organizations are definitely inundated in the spring. It's baby season. And they're seeing this kind of thing all the time. People are just bringing in fawns and bringing in, baby birds who have fallen out of the net. Like, there's so much. If you can bring the fawn in yourself, that is going to be the best thing you can do to help, just alleviate some of the pressure off of the wildlife rescue, especially since you're bringing them. They're going to have to then, do what they have to do to take care of that animal. And so whatever you can do to just alleviate some stress. So place a towel over her. If you have one, if you don't have a towel, don't not do that. Like, don't not pick her up because you think you have to have a towel. Pick her up gently with a towel if you have it, or something, right? Place her in a covered box or crate. Don't give her any food and don't give her any water. And that's going to be the case for any wild animal. Do not feed them. Do not give them water. Any animal, rat, bird, mouse, deer, possum, raccoon, don't give them any water. Don't give them any food. And I do suggest that if someone is not well, first kind of get what you need. Get the box, find a box, knock on a door, go see what you have in your trunk, go run home and get something. First, get in place what you need, and then pick her up so you know exactly where you're bringing her. Look, if you don't have a covered box or crate and she looks like she's in distress and you're in a car, you can just put her in the car, put her in the back seat. She's just going to stay still. She's, she might cry, but she's it's okay. But whatever you can do to just kind of mitigate any stress for her is going to be the best thing you can do. Don't talk to her. Don't pet her. Don't try to interact with her. These are wild animals who are more stressed with more human interaction. I will tell you also, so in the same vein of people knowing that I might have some information that would be helpful, a friend of ours, Tony, our friend, he's our contractor. He's a very good friend. He lives in an area that has a wooded kind of area behind him, a little stream. And he called me one day and he said, do deer bite? And I was like, what? No. And he said, do deer bite? And I go, why? What's going on? What's happening? And he said, because there is a fawn, a baby, this would have been just last year, entangled in some wire, some, what do you call it? Fence wire. And it wasn't even his fence. I think it was his neighbor's property line. And there was this barbed wire. I don't know if barbed. I shouldn't say it was barbed. I think it was just wire for some fencing. Maybe barbed, actually. I don't know. And he said his foot got caught. And the mom's nearby and the baby's in distress. And he said, I want to go help the baby, but I don't know if is he going to bite? And I said, here's the deal. The baby's going to be more afraid of you than you need to be of him. He's not going to bite. Mom's nearby. So just have someone with you to watch your back. Because if mom is nearby and watching and she thinks you're hurting her baby, she will come or potentially come and attack. And attacking when deer attack to fend off a threat, they will get on their hind legs and they will literally smack the hell out of you. So, or if they're bucks, or in this case would be does mostly, but they could butt you as well. I mean, the does can do that too, but the males would obviously use their antlers. But most likely they stand on their hind legs and they whack at you. And that's really dangerous and, potentially lethal. So just watch your back as you're doing this. And so I said, just go get some, make sure you have some wire cutters, be able to just free her, but you can put a towel over her a little bit first so she doesn't get scared, and then do whatever you need to do to free her. And he did. And it was wonderful. But what I'm saying to you is she is not going to bite you. She doesn't have rabies. Deer don't have rabies. Might she have some ticks? Sure, she might. And so just, maybe check yourself to make sure you don't have any ticks when you're done helping. But she's not going to hurt you. And this is one of the reasons I encourage people to have a little animal emergency kit in your car. So having a towel in your back, in your trunk, having a box, maybe, that's just a flattened box, right? You never know. And so I've talked about this in other episodes, just having some things in place. And if you are taking her to the rehab, call first, and you could even get more guidance and advice from them, and then let them know that you're bringing the baby. There's one occasion where you can handle the fawn if she's okay. And that is if she is in a dangerous location, if she's in a busy road, if she's in foot traffic, if she's near a dog who would hurt her or scare her, you can move the fawn to a safer location. So this past weekend, when my neighbors reached out to me and they sent me a picture, the fawn was up against the garage door. Right. And so, she's having a party that night and she wants to pull into her garage. Right. And this poor deer is going to be pretty well scared. And I said to them, listen, if you have a towel, even if you don't, you can pick her up very gently and, first identify a spot you want to put her in. That's going to be more in the ivy, more in, the brush, more in the grass, and put her in that spot. She'll be safer there. Mom will still be able to smell her. She's still right in the same vicinity. She could have been originally put there, and then the fawn walked up and, got up and walked over to the garage. And you can relocate her. Identify the place you're going to move her to, handle her as little as possible. Now, when they did this, they said because they did wind up doing what I suggested, they said, I think she's, after they moved her, they said, I think she's not well. She didn't move at all. She was very limp, and I think she's dying. And I said, again, based on information I get from all of my wildlife experts, it's very normal for a fawn to be limp like that because, again, their programming is to just go limp. They don't have a fear response to predators yet, but their programming is to stay hidden, to stay limp until, ideally, mama comes back. So you can be confident in picking her up, just be gentle, put her down, and walk away. Just leave the space, just leave the place, right? And leave it. Please hear me and hear me now. Having your scent on the baby is not going to deter the mother from returning to the baby once you walk away. You are not going to imprint the baby in the, 60 seconds it takes you, or 2 minutes, whatever it is, that would make it impossible for her to reunite with her mama. It's not going to happen. Not just picking her up and moving her over here. Okay. Now, when they're in wildlife rehab and they have to, basically bottle feed them, there is a real risk. I mean, this is one of the reasons it's so much work. And if you're listening to this and you want to make a donation to your wildlife group, even if you haven't taken advantage of them, please know they need it. Like, we don't have a wildlife rescue in Oakland. This is one of the major cities in California, and we don't have a wildlife rescue. They were forced out of their place, Yggdrasil, and they're now in San Francisco. And, Oakland has a lot more open space than San Francisco does. So there's a lot more wildlife, and we don't have a dedicated wildlife organization. So we put things in place so that Yggdrasil can work with Oakland Animal Services, and we have some amazing volunteers who actually are transport volunteers. And this is something you can be involved in as well if you want to be a transport volunteer for a wildlife rescue. That's the biggest thing, is if people call them and they're 30 miles away, or 20 or 10, and they don't have enough resources to go pick up an animal they know is injured, you bringing them there, of course, if you're the one who sees them, is going to be a huge help. But even you could be as part of a hotline, you could be part of the train of calls that say, we have a pickup in, at this place, and can you go? And you can go to the place and pick them up and bring them to the wildlife services. And that's something that is super helpful. So just having transport involved. So the point is, there's so much work to be done for wildlife, and these rescue organizations are, to me, they're heroes. They're just absolute heroes, because their intention is to bring that animal back into the wild, right? So they have to be really careful about not imprinting these animals. And I follow Wild Care. It's one of my favorite organizations here in the Bay Area. They're in Marin County. They're up in the North Bay. They have a wildlife hotline. So, and some organizations do. So I really encourage you to check out if there is one. But I will also suggest that you can call Wild Care. They have a 24-hour emergency hotline. They have volunteers who are there to help. And again, it could just be guidance. So put their number in your phone as well. You can go to Wild Care. If you go to discoverwildcare.org, that's their website, but I'll also give you the phone number, and I'll put this in my show notes. But 415-456-SAVE. 415-456-SAVE, which is 7283. Their hotline will be able to help you. Like, you can, send them the pictures and show them the thing. Like, those kinds of just reaching out like that. It's just what our neighbors did. That, the situation was all okay, and just talking to someone who knows more than you do is just so helpful, right? So they have to be really careful to not imprint the animals, but you moving that baby just to get her out of that more precarious situation, she's going to be fine. You're not going to imprint her. Mom is most likely very close by, but she is not going to return until you're gone. So in this case, the lovely Danielle and Marie, they moved the fawn. They were concerned that she was, dying. And I said, I'm sure she's fine. I'm sure she's okay. Let's just see what happens. And, tell the woman, her name was Alice, tell Alice, the woman who owns the house, that you've moved the fawn. There she is. She's over there. And actually, I didn't tell you this part. Danielle and Marie said to me that when they moved her, even though she was limp, they moved her. Where they moved her to, they saw the mama and they saw another young deer. And so I was like, yeah, she's nearby. She's right there. She's going to be fine. And so, and I was like, okay, now go tell Alice, the woman whose house it was, that you've done that, just to kind of keep an eye out and just maybe just alert her guests that there's a vulnerable fawn outside, and maybe just keep an eye. But at least now she was off the driveway. She was not near the garage. The people could come to the party, and, everything could move forward. And this morning, so this is all happening. So that was all happening on Saturday. Today's Thursday as I'm recording this. This morning, the text that I saw as I woke up in the morning was from Danielle, and she said, here's what I just got from Alice. And Alice, whose house it was, said, I saw the mother deer and the baby deer come to eat ivy at my neighbor's backyard around 6 p.m. And that is how that story ended. And that is because people cared. People were paying attention. They reached out to get help, to get more information, to know what to do. And they did the right thing. And how beautiful is that? It just makes my heart sing. And I hope this helps you. I hope you're able to pass this on. I hope this, 'cause sometimes we need to hear this information a few times, right? I get it, because sometimes, I even forget, what do we do with a bird? And the birds are so much harder, because it's well, are they fledglings? Are they newborns? I'm I don't know. Are they hatchlings? Are they fledglings? And sometimes it's so hard to remember, right? I'm better with the fawns. I'm better with the deer. But these are the kinds of things that I think we all encounter, and from a good place and from a big heart, we want to help and we want to do the right thing. So I hope that is helpful. Speaking of help, just a bit of business. If you want to help keep this podcast going, if you value it, if you get out any information from it, please consider becoming a supporter. Every and any level you join at makes it possible for me to write, to research, to record, to edit, to produce this podcast, and your help is very much needed, very much needed. Thank you to the same people who I keep thanking. If you'd like to join them, please go to patreon.com/Colleen Patrick-Goudreau, or just go to joyfulvegan.com/donate. You can make a one-time contribution. You can make an annual, you can make it, well, you can do annual, you can do monthly. You can do whatever you want, but the same core people, in addition to all of our, $5 a month and $10 a month and $20, there's so many of you, that matters, that really matters. And some of the higher level folks who have been the core support, some of whom for many, many years, I'm so grateful to David Cabrera and Alexander Gray, Brooke Boussard, Michal Stone, Gina Stryler, Carrie Parker, Risa Ribakov. Thank you to Simon Small, Angelica Lofton, Jennifer Statmiller, Jennifer Watkins, Geraldine Hilmar, PJ Schuster, Denise Hoskins, Ranjini Mohan, Tina Strassheim, and Liz D. You can join them by becoming a supporter at joyfulvegan.com. Until next time, for the animals, this is Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. Thanks for listening.